You're listening to episode 141, Facing the Past to Live as the Hero of Your Story with Perry Power. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome, and thank you so much for tuning in to this latest episode of the podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here. And today we're going to be joined by personal branding and storytelling coach and sexual abuse survivor, Perry Power. And before we get into this one, I do just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better at novni.com. So Perry is joining us today to share his story that he started sharing publicly this year of being sexually abused when he was 10 years old. He's very open and vulnerable when he shares his story, and he's on a mission to transform the lives of those who have gone through something similar. In particular, Perry's going to talk about a major loss that was the catalyst to him making changes in his life and ultimately sharing his story, how he kept the experience to himself for 14 years, how he didn't know the abuse was wrong until he was a little older, and how that realization impacted him. He'll share his experience of sharing his story publicly for the first time, and also what has allowed him to find forgiveness. And we'll also talk about the importance of being able to let go of the things that we can't change, and how we have the choice to be the hero of our story. Now, I do just want to issue a trigger warning if you're someone who has experienced sexual abuse yourself, as Perry does go into some detail in sharing his story, so that may be triggering for you. But otherwise, if you're good with that, we have a great episode here for you today, and we'll go ahead and get into this one, and I'll go bring Perry on. Perry, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm excited to have you here. You and I got connected through social media, as it were.
We sure did.
Yeah, which is cool. And I think, we were interested in what each other was doing. You recently started sharing your story publicly of abuse you experienced growing up. And I know you're passionate about supporting others who have had similar experiences. So we connected to see how we could support each other in the work that we're doing. And you had me as a guest on your podcast not too long ago, which was really great to get to do and to share my story with your audience. And I'll have that linked up on the show notes for anyone who would like to check that out. And yeah, I'm just glad to be able to have you on here today to share your story with my audience and bring them some hope and inspiration and talk about your mission now, which is to help inspire individuals to master the narrative of their life and shape the world with their personal story. So Perry, what I'd like to do here is have you start us out by sharing with us what you'd like us to know about about the abuse that you experienced growing up. And then we'll go from there. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds fantastic, Melissa. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just tell us about, what happened and how old you were when it happened.
Yeah, sure thing. So the best way for me to explain it is to take just a small step back, just to sort of help give some context in regards to it. So June the 1st, 2017, last year, my dad passed away from a sudden heart attack. And when he passed away, that obviously hit me hard, as it would to anybody. We were very close. And I went on about, I'll probably say, for argument's sake, for you to say like 12 months, so about a year's worth of a journey of reflection. So I was just looking back on where my dad went. I don't know if I would call it wrong, but just to see the path that he went down that led him towards that death. And it was primarily due to alcohol abuse and his death. And then I wanted to dig a bit deeper as to why he went down the route of alcohol abuse. And And I know that my dad was a man's man, and he wouldn't let people see his emotions. And whenever he would try to be vulnerable, he'd want to numb that vulnerability with alcohol. He just wouldn't want to share his true self, right? He wouldn't want to share anything that he had been through in his life. He didn't want to become the hero of his story, and he remained the victim. And when I saw that, there was a moment where I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I saw myself in 20 years' time, and I saw myself going down a road of my dad, neck deep in a bottle of alcohol, and climb my way into a grave before the age of 50. And when I saw that, I was like, there's no way I'm letting that happen. I need to make the change. And because I knew that for about over 14 years prior to that, I was living my life wearing a mask, right? And I was living my life as an identity of who I wanted people to see me as, rather than me being who I truly was. And I knew why I was being like that. And seeing my dad going down that path, I was like, right, I need to make the oath right now to rip that mask away from me. And then that's when I shared for the very first time my story. And what that story is that when I was 10 years old, for over the span of about 12 months or so, I was repeatedly sexually abused by my granddad. He wasn't blood, so out of respect with my granddad, but he's basically my nan's husband. And like, I remember this one time where for the very first time I was staying around my nan's house. And I remember that they were putting me to bed in the spare room. And I remember, like, Michael was his name. Michael would put his arm around my nan and just saying goodnight to me. I remember looking at my nan's face and she's like, good night. And then I remember looking at Michael's face, and I just remember wishing to myself, and I was about 10 years old, right? I remember wishing to myself, I hope that he doesn't come in here tonight, because the times that he had sexually abused me was during daylight, and it was primarily is with people in the house. Like, he was a guy that got a thrill of it. And it wasn't, so that was the first time I stayed around their house overnight. And I didn't know if he was going to come in the room and potentially rape me. Luckily, thankfully, he didn't. Nothing like that happened. And I don't think, well, I don't know. I don't think he would have gone to that length, but who knows, right? But with me, it was more the case of, and like I said, you asked a question about how much I want to go into sharing. I'm an open book. Like, there's no tomorrow, because that's what I stand by.
Yeah, no, you've been very open and very vulnerable.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I want other people to do the same. And I remember that I was actually having a conversation about this with my mum. This must have been, so I'm in Spain at the moment. It was a couple of days before I went out to Spain. So let's just say it was last week. It was late last week. I was having a conversation. And because ever since I shared it on social media, they haven't really talked to me about it. And then
when was that you shared it? That was not too long ago, right?
Mm-hmm. About 8-9 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Was the first time I shared it. And it was the beginning of this year. About the beginning of this year. And then they've asked me like one or two questions, right? But then last week they asked me quite a few questions, and the reason why they did that is because my mom found a letter. Now, when I was at school, your equivalent of high school. So when I was at high school, I was partnered up with I don't know what you'd call them in the States, but we call them like a counselor, right? It was a school counselor, and I would meet with her once a week, and she would just see how I'm doing in classes, and she would visit the home I think once a month or something, where she would see what my behavior is like at home. And I've always just thought over these years that it was just due to me being a bit, just being a naughty kid, really, because I had a bit of a lip on me growing up, but nothing. I wasn't anything to do with crime or anything like that. I was a good boy, because my dad brought me up and raised me in a bubble. So I was partnered up with her, and they found a letter, right? She's going through her stuff, and she showed me this last week, and this is what led on to the conversation. And his letter was...
The counselor found the letter?
No, my mum found the letter.
Okay.
My mum found a letter which was written by the counselor, and I actually have her on my Facebook, because I ended up messaging the counselor after. I was like, hey, we talked back and forth. She actually reached out to me when I released my story video 8-9 months ago. She goes, hey, Perry, I don't know if you remember me. I have no idea how she found me on Facebook, but she just said, "Oh, I've watched a video. What a guy you grow into, blah blah blah." So I still had her on Facebook, so I sort of communicated with her after the letter. But basically, what the letter was saying was that and I don't remember this, which is crazy. I was at school, and we must have been in class, and we must have got like an assignment, some sort of in-class homework from a teacher to write out a story. So my guess is that it must have been either in English or in drama, but I got a feeling it would have been in English, where we just had to write out a story as a bit of homework. And apparently, it didn't go into much detail, the letter, but when I asked the counselor woman, Anthea, when I asked her, she basically said that in this story that I wrote down, I talked about the sexual abuse, which I thought was quite
interesting.
like,
and you didn't remember?
I don't have a single recollection of that ever happening. I don't remember writing it, which it's quite strange, but I just don't even remember it. So my mum found this letter last week. She goes, "This is interesting, Perry. I remember getting given this." But she also wasn't 100% sure on what I was writing about in the assignment. So like, because my mum had said to me, "Oh, do you still have on Facebook message?" And she goes, "Yeah, it was about Michael." And then that's when they started asking me questions. And my mum, which is what I'm leading on to now, my mum, she's like, "I always thought that it was just the once that Michael did something to you." And she goes, "And that was because one Christmas, like there was a couple of people, as in my nan and my auntie, were sitting in the living room. The way that this single couch was positioned in the living room, its back was against the main seat where everyone was sitting on, right? So if you're sitting on a large couch at the back of the room, facing forward, like to watch the TV, the single couch is kind of positioned away from you, right? So you can't necessarily see the front of the person that's sitting on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
So my mum was saying that she walked in, and I was sitting on Michael's lap, and she sort of sat herself down, not thinking of anything. But what happened was Michael was a smoker, and he dropped his cigarette onto the floor, right? A burning cigarette. He dropped it onto the floor, but he didn't move. His hands didn't move to pick it up. And I was sitting on him, and my mom was like, that's strange. There's a burning cigarette burning a hole into the carpet, and he hasn't moved to pick it up." She goes, "Something's going on here." And because what he used to do to me, he used to fiddle with me for a while down below, basically, without trying to put it into detail.
Mm-hmm.
And so mom was like, "Perry, come off him," right, kind of thing. And then she was like, "Right, we're going to go now." And then that kind of pieced the puzzle together. And it's the whole thing. Like, when you share your experience, when you share your story like that, other pieces come together because other people's versions or recollections of that same event. So if I never shared my story, I wouldn't have known about that event of my mum walking in there with the cigarette butt falling off the floor, which then led into leaving the house, mum talking to my dad about it, which now makes sense because I was always like, my dad's, because people are like, "Well, how did it get out into the open?" So it happened for over a year, and it stopped when I was like 10, 11 years old, and he passed away very shortly after from a heart attack at work. But I never knew how my dad found out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now, because I consistently share my story, and it got to a point where my mom wanted to talk to me about it, now it makes sense because she said that she left the house, she told my dad about it, and then he talked to me about it, and sort of situated the conversation in a certain way for me to start talking about it. And also what I found out was that I wasn't the only one in the family that Michael sexually abused. There was actually 4 of us.
Wow.
Which is crazy. My cousin was one of them, and I actually got her to do the same thing as me, which is sharing her story via video on Facebook, which got tremendous views and responses, which is absolutely beautiful.
So you've all talked about it with each other, those of you that were abused by him?
Yeah. Well, yes. We're not an in-depth conversation. Me and my cousin, yes. And I won't say their names because they haven't released their story. But we never went into depth with the other 2 that it happened to because they don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, me and my cousin have.
Mm-hmm.
And with my cousin, with Michael, he would be doing something to me. But with Michael, he got my cousin to do things to him. So, like, for example, he would play ball, like fetch with a tennis ball, and then he would put the tennis ball down his trousers and make my cousin go and fetch it, kind of thing. And he'd do a few things like that. which obviously is disgusting, obviously. But he was doing both sides, if that makes sense. He was doing it and he was getting people to do it to him as well.
Mm-hmm. So what was it that led to the abuse stopping when it did?
It led because my dad talked to me about it when I was about 11. And when he found out that what I said in regards to what Michael was doing to me, my dad, nobody knows what happened because my dad never talked about it. And obviously I can't ask him today, but he apparently went round there to the house to confront Michael. And that's all we know. So he went around there to confront Michael. I never stepped foot in the house again until Michael passed away at work, which I don't know how long, but it must have been about a year or so after.
Mm. And then you said you kept this story to yourself for 14 years after this point. What were those 14 years like for you?
It's a great question, because I would say that the damage was being done beneath the surface, right? Because it wasn't like every single day I think about it, because we've got lives, we do things, and which takes our minds off it. And again, I was 10 years old. If I was being repeatedly sexually abused when I'm maybe 20, when like I can maybe think of it differently, because when it was happening to me when I was 10, I didn't know it was a wrong thing, because he was my granddad. He wasn't a stranger off the street.
Right.
So why would my granddad be doing something wrong to me? And at the age when I was 10 years old, sexual abuse wasn't a thing on the news. It didn't really get talked about. So I didn't know it was a wrong thing, right? So when my dad said that it was wrong, it was hard for me to sort of understand it. And then obviously after that happened, so I was like 11, 12, and then I'll go to school, and I just didn't talk about it, because 11, 12, 13-year-olds at school don't talk about things like that. So I never ever talked about it. So when I was young, for the majority of the time, I just never really thought about it until his name would pop up, or I would see something happen in the newspaper or something like that. Then I'll think about it. But as I got older, so when I reached like the 16, 17, 18-year-old mark, and then I knew, because I started to develop mindset-wise, and I started to think about things and look back at that stage, and things were starting to pop up in the news, and I hear about people that go through that, and I hear about how disgusting it was. Then whatever was happening beneath the surface started to bubble up and break through the floor, so to speak. And I just started to really, really sort of resent myself, and I started to really blame myself for what happened, because I was like, I let it go on for let's just say a year, and I never talked about it. If I decided to talk about it, then maybe I could have put a stop to it. And basically, I was just I think I was transitioning from being a victim to my own story to being a villain of my own story. I was seeing myself as the enemy in my story, and yeah, that's just it just sort of piled over and just really affected me growing up.
Yeah, and I mean, tell us more about the ways in which you were affected, and like how did that sort of continue? I mean, so when did things, I guess, start to shift for you, right? And so I know you kept this to yourself for 14 years. Once you started talking about it, did you find that you were still being affected by what had happened, or were things starting to shift at that point?
So after my so after my dad passed away, I went through that time of reflecting, and then I went to a mastermind event. And there's a mastermind event for completely unrelated. It was just for business. And when I was there, that was kind of like in my, I don't know if you want to call it like the prime. I was in my prime moment where I was like, I need to talk about it. I need to talk about it to somebody outside of my immediate family. I just need to talk about it and express. But then we all had that negative voice inside our head who always tries to combat what we want to do. No, you shouldn't do that. No, you shouldn't do it because of this, because of that. And I was at the mastermind event. It was me, 4 other people, and we had the two mentors. And they said, right, guys, introduce yourself. This was day 1 of the 5-day event. And I was on the outside of this group. So I was like, right, so I'm either going to be first or I'm going to be last to introduce myself. And they started thankfully on the other side. So I was like, okay, so I'm lost. Now, I don't remember a single word that anybody was saying whilst they're introducing themselves. I was just thinking to myself, where do I start in my introduction? Do I just give a boring introduction? Hey, I'm Perry, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Or do I cut right deep? Do I literally, cut myself open, let everybody see on the inside, which would be the first time I've ever done it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't actually come to a decision by the time it got to me. So when I said Perry, my lips just started moving. And then I started off on your cliche, boring introduction. But then all of a sudden, I just went straight into it. And if you ask me why, the answer would be, I have no idea. I just went into it. And I talked about what I've already just spoken through. And that was my first moment. That was the first time I shared it in over 14 years. And I couldn't look at anybody in the eye. And, I wasn't burnt alive. I wasn't outcasted. And everybody welcomed me and they thanked me after for sharing, because it opened up the group. And I was like, wow, okay. So that was my first taste of being accepted and what I thought I'd be outcasted for. Right.
And I think that's what makes it difficult for people to share sometimes, right? Is they feel like, they're not sure what the reaction is going to be. Right.
Yeah.
So you play it safe and you don't share it. So it's great that you had, such a supportive response to it. Because especially when you're sharing it for the first time, you certainly don't want to be, judged for that. And then you're going to shut down and not talk about it again.
100%.
So you were talking about it with your parents though, up until this point?
No.
Or you weren't talking about it with anyone?
No, I wasn't. I never talked about it, because it wasn't a thing where like I'll sit in my room and then I'll be like, I really want to talk about it. And I just never let it. I wasn't, and I think a lot of, yes, females, but I'm talking of a majority here. A lot of men will be able to relate to this in regards to, we are experts at taking something and shoving it down into a secret box and locking it away. We're very good at it. I was an absolute master at it. So I like a lot of time I wouldn't think about it and it wouldn't affect me. Right. And that's just the way it was. Like I said, there'll be off chances where it would. But up until that point, I remember that there was like a one or two occasion where I would bring it up to my dad. I can't remember all of them. I do remember the last one, which is, I remember being in the car. We parked outside our family home. And then I said to my dad, like, I don't know if you yourself or any of the listeners have seen a film called Spotlight. And yeah, so Spotlight is a film about the Boston newspaper where they find a priest who sexually abused a kid, and they want to dive into that story. And all of a sudden, it's not just that one priest, it's loads of priests. And then as I dive into that, there becomes thousands and thousands of priests all over the world with reported cases of sexually abusing children. And that's what that film is about. And towards the end of the film, there are credits of all the cases around the world where it had documented all of the locations around the world that had documented cases of sexual abuse. One of them was a boarding school / church in Ireland, which is actually where Michael and his brother were raised, because they were raised in boarding schools, and his two sisters were raised in a nun school. And the sisters were physically abused by the nuns. And although he denies it, Michael, but he does say that all of the other boys in that school were sexually abused by the priests, right? And that school was in the Spotlight film. And I remember being in my car and my dad's car, and I said to him, I brought it up. I was like, Dad, that's crazy. Like, doesn't it make sense? And when I said that, he flipped. And it's just like, it doesn't make sense. And obviously, two things. One, because he was also a victim of Michael. And two, because I'm his son. So obviously he doesn't want to speak about it, doesn't want to talk about it, because it's his son that has gone through this. And I remember bringing up this conversation and my dad just shut me out straight away. Don't want to talk about it, Perry. So I wouldn't have had, if I would have walked up to my dad and be like, Dad, I really want to talk about it from heart to heart. Obviously he would have said, yeah, okay, son. But I didn't position the conversation in that way because that wasn't my intent. It was just no, that's interesting. And this is what I want to talk about as well on this show of yours is forgiveness. That was how I was able to move on from that. So I was working.
And it was when you, well, no, go ahead. I'll let you share.
No, I was going to say that is, I started to not, it wasn't a primary focus of mine to work on forgiveness before I shared it at the mastermind. That was my focus. My main focus at that time was just sharing it, right?
And now,
Um,
when you shared at the mastermind, did you know going into it that you were going to share, or you just
no,
started thinking about it once you were there?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, literally as I was on that couch, the thought was there, but it's like being in a casino. I wouldn't have gambled chips on this. I wouldn't have thought I would have shared it. And then something just possessed me and decided talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Which obviously I thank whatever did possess me to talk about it. And then
Always share
after
when the time is right, I think, and we just
exactly
know when
that
that
was the time.
is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the time. Obviously, and I I started to then work on forgiveness, and I started to work on forgiving myself. That was the main thing for me. And the way I was there, because some people will say, "Oh, because I can just say I worked on forgiving myself, and then that's it." But some people want to know, well, how did you forgive yourself, Perry?
Yeah,
Um,
because
and I don't
it's a
have,
hard thing for some people,
yeah,
you know.
it is a very hard thing. And unfortunately, I don't have a this is exactly what I did kind of thing to forgive myself. Definitely the main, if you want to call it like tip or medicine, whatever you want to call it, like the main thing that helped me to forgive myself and forgive the situation was time.
Mm-hmm.
Time was a main healing factor. But obviously that's not the only thing, because otherwise, why can people not find forgiveness 20 years later? So that's not going to be the only thing. But what really did help me was to allow myself to revisit that situation, because when people decide to ignore it and try to move on, it's impossible. You can't move on while trying to ignore it. You have to face it. It's like facing your fear. You can't move on whilst that fear is still grabbing a hold of you.
Yeah, you have to work through it.
You have to work through it. So I decided to go back to that situation and try to remember and try to put myself back into that position. And here's the thing, it wasn't a torturous time for me as a 10-year-old, because I didn't know it was wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
me revisiting that situation isn't like nightmares or horrors, you know. It's so For me to find forgiveness, I had to, like I said, go back to that situation and keep on going back over it. It decided it wasn't overnight. It was more of a gradual thing. I started to forgive myself. I was like, you know what, Perry, like it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. He manipulated you in a certain way, and then, but I still had a thing in me, right, where I was like, I know what I need to do. And I'm not telling everyone listening to this should do the same thing if they had a similar situation. But this is what I choose to do. And this is all that I can comment on. And I decided that I wanted to forgive Michael for what he did to me. Now, I've had this conversation with quite a few people. Me forgiving him is not me giving him a get out of free jail card. I'm not letting him off the hook for anything. I'm
Right.
not forgiving him for him. I'm forgiving him for me, so I can move on. It's a
Mm-hmm.
difference,
Yes,
right?
forgiveness is for us. It's not for them.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of people get confused by,
Mm-hmm.
which I understand, because if you're saying, do you forgive Barry? You think, well, for you to forgive Barry, then you need to be okay with Barry and look at him and be able to smile and be happy with him. And that's not the
Yeah, I
case.
think if people confuse, or they associate forgiveness with acceptance, right? Or
Yeah.
you know thinking that
Yeah.
what happened was okay, and that's not the case. I mean, we can forgive without thinking that what they did was right.
Yeah. It's a great way to put it. So I worked on forgiving him. Now, here is what I can say I did do for me to help um, forgive him. And again, that was taking the time to sit down and look back at Michael and to dive into his story, because I wanted to know, because nobody is born to be sexually aroused over children. You're not born and you're not turned on by a 6-year-old. That doesn't happen, you know? Well, maybe there's studies. I have no idea. I haven't dived into studies, but just my mind, I'm like, something would have had to have happened to that particular person for them to then inflict that same damage over someone else. That's
Mm-hmm.
the way that I look at it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, right, for him, he inflicted the damage on me. He inflicted the damage on my cousin, 2 other people in my family. Why? That's what I wanted to know. Okay. So I dived into his story, and I found out about him and his siblings and the school that they were raised in. Spotlight the film. And I was like, huh, this kind of makes sense, this doesn't make sense. So this makes sense that he had a rough childhood. He wasn't brought up in a comfy home by loving parents. He was brought up by multiple different priests who were sexually abusing them, and they were hopping around schools. And like that, it does make sense. He was raised up in pieces, and we all have a choice, right? He could have had the choice to become somebody very, very inspirational. Maybe travel the world, maybe spoke on stages, or maybe not. Maybe just had a normal life, but they just decided to become the hero of their story rather than inflicting that same damage onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found out about that and I put all those pieces together, that single-handedly helped me to forgive him and be able to move on, because I kind of had, everyone's different, but I feel sorry for him. I do. I have a bit of sympathy. I do feel sorry for him with how he was raised. And this may be hard for some people to do the same thing, but I think it also comes down to self-worth, like I know I do have self-worth, and I do love myself, and I do, I like myself being here on this world. So I know that I'm worthy of something. So that helps me to be able to look back. Because if I thought I was just scum on the bottom of someone's shoe, which a lot of people who have been through something like somebody who's been through a lot of bullying over the years and they grow up, they do feel like that because they let those bullies control them. So they don't feel like they're something special.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I felt like that, I'd probably say a couple of years growing up. But then I didn't feel like that growing, like as the years went on, into my early 20s, which really helped me, because like, Michael doesn't have a hold on me. Who is that guy? I was like, dude, I feel sorry for you, man. And that was my outlook on it. And that really helped me be able to progress and move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and having that perspective, having that self-worth, that makes such a huge difference. And that does allow you to be able to kind of focus on, your life and your future and what you want, rather than getting, really stuck by what you went through and being held up by your past. And yeah, I know you and I had talked previously about, how you kind of came to understand where your grandfather was coming from, after you saw the movie. And yeah, I think, that is the case a lot of times. People who are abusing people, they've been through something themselves. They have been abused themselves. They've been hurt in some way. And yes, that does not make it right. But what it does do sometimes is it allows us to be able to, process it in a way that allows us to, move on from it and to just have that sort of understanding, without saying, that it's okay that for what happened, but, it allows us to find that forgiveness and be able to move on. And I know that that's something that previous guests have talked about as well, that has helped them, is just being able to understand the situation, and understanding what happened, why this happened, so you can see how that has definitely been important in your healing.
That's a great way to put it. And everyone, if anybody is just stuck in those times, stuck in the past, so to speak, and definitely just try to take the same steps I did. Find that forgiveness, dive into their story. Remember, everyone has a story, so dive into their story. Try to figure out why they position themselves, whether they remain the victim or to become the villain of their story and inflict the pain onto other people, because that will really help you be able to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult when, like, you feel like there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like it just happened, you don't know why, and that makes it a lot more difficult to understand and be able to process and move on from.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Very good point what you just brought up. Because like, let's just say, for example, I dived into Michael's story and he grew up in a beautiful home with beautiful loving parents. Nothing happened to him. Then what? Actually, that's a very good point you brought up, because it will be, because just statistics, there will be some people who are listening to this who maybe they have maybe intentionally or unintentionally dived into that person's story, and they just live a normal life, right? And if that's the case, then you need to come at it from the angle of, you're not meant to understand. You have a choice. I chose to try to understand where he was coming from, but at the end of the day, you're not meant to understand why they did it, because it's not in your control. It's like, I always tell people that, whether I work with them or like they're a friend of mine, I'm just like, if something's out of your control, why are you getting angry over it? You can't do anything. People that get angry because it's raining, well, why are you getting angry?
Mm-hmm.
You're not controlling the weather. You can't control that guy's action. If somebody beat you up or somebody sexually abused you, whatever it is, at the end of the day, and I know it's hard, but it's a difference from somebody just saying it and have no experience, and somebody actually saying it and who's gone through it themselves. And it's just, you're not meant to understand why that person did it. They did it for whatever reason that they did it in their own head, but at the end of the day, it's out of your control. You still letting them like master you as a puppet. They're still winning the situation. They're still controlling you, and I'm sure you don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know Hal Elrod, Miracle
Yeah.
Morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had him on the show a while back, and he gives himself like 5 minutes to be angry about something that he can't change, and then he's like, I can't change it, move on. And I really credit him for being able to do that, because it's not easy all the time, but that is the right attitude to have about it.
Yeah. And I use this as an example in regards to when I help people create their personal story. I always say, like, let's just say there's a certain chapter of your life, which everyone's going to have listened to the show, and there's a certain chapter of your life where it brings back bad memories, right? It brings back bad emotions or whatever it is. I saw somebody on stage and they were saying that you should always ride the wave of emotion, because according to statistics, that an emotion can only last up to 90. Damn it! It's either 90 seconds or 90 minutes. It was one of the two. It's like 90 seconds or 90 minutes, right? But
I
I got
want
a
to say
feeling.
90 seconds. I feel like I've
Yeah,
heard that.
I got a feeling it's 90 seconds. Yeah, and it's saying that you want to ride the wave of emotion, because if you ride that wave of emotion, that wave of emotion will not last longer than 90 seconds. But you trying to pummel that emotion down, that's going to last a
Makes
lot
it
longer
last
than 90
longer.
seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's a great way to look at it. Because if you can ride it and you can deal with that emotion may never come back because you decided to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. So,
Yeah.
So Perry, how are you doing today? And, are there things that you still struggle with?
In regards to my story and what I went through, there's nothing that I struggle with. And the reason why I say that is because, well, two things. One, because I managed to handle it. It depends on what you're talking about. Like, if you're talking about that specific thing in regards to the sexual abuse, then no, it doesn't
Yeah,
have
I
a control.
mean, looking at the ways that you were affected at the time, do any of those things still show up for you today?
Unless there's things where, unless there's things on how it shaped me growing up that I'm unaware of, I'm not. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. So me trying to think of it feels like I'm trying to like force maybe a characteristic on that's still here today that I know is still attached to or is like a side effect from what I was going through. Like I said, the first, because I dealt with it, one, I took the time to do it, and two, because literally what I do for a living is helping people go through their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I am able to see what other people go through, right?
Or do you
And
do you ever find that you get triggered at all?
I don't get triggered by what I went through. I may get triggered by what they went through, because I'm a very emotional guy. And so let's say I'm talking to somebody and they've gone through something or they're going through something. I may get emotionally triggered, but that's because of their pain. And it's not really directed. And this is the thing: if me, when I was 10 years old, if I knew that it was really bad what he was doing, right? And or maybe it was a step further than what he was doing to me, and I knew it was terrible what he was doing to me, and it was an experience I never wanted to look back on, then the answer may be different when I'm giving to you now.
Yeah, it sounds like the fact that you didn't know that it was necessarily a bad thing sort of protected you in some way against being really negatively affected by it.
That's a good way of putting it, and I think that's correct.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I like how you worded that, because it does kind of wrap it all up into a nice little bow, so to speak, in regards to how it's all come together because of that.
Yeah. And, and we all, experience what we've gone through in our own way, right? And it's all our own unique experience. And, we all have unique perspectives on what we've been through and how we were affected by that. So yeah, so it's interesting, just to hear about your experience and how, you were affected. So I know that you did, have things come up for you, like you said, especially later on in your teenage years, you had stuff come up for you then. And
Yeah.
it sounds like, you've been able to process that and you're in a pretty good place today.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, well, that's great. So Perry, tell us about what it is that you do now.
So I'm a personal branding and storytelling coach. And I first started out as just helping people with their personal stories. Because when I first shared my story on Facebook, like I said, after the mastermind, well, I don't think I mentioned it, but after the mastermind, I was driving home, I literally swerved into some estate and popped the phone on my dashboard and shared my story.
That was right after the mastermind.
Literally, because I was still in the buzz. It's like, if I go home now, I will not record this, right? Because I was like, I shared this story with 4 people at a mastermind. I want to share it with like a normal sane person would be like, I want to go home and I'm going to share it with like the extra family member, or call up my friend. But me, I wanted to tell the whole world, right? And just dive into the deep end.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, once you start, I mean, for me anyways too, like, I mean, once I started putting it out there a little bit publicly, like I just wanted to go all out,
Go all in.
Right?
Yeah. And so so I posted that video and that got a beautiful response, a response I wasn't expecting, because I posted that video initially for me. I didn't post it so everyone could know, kind of thing. Like, initially, my first reason as to why I wanted to do it. The main reason initially why I wanted to do it is because there was this fear of me being just crazy scared to share it. I was like, I don't want that to take control over me. So that's why I initially done it. And then once I posted it and then started to get all the engagement, and then what I always say now is just to help that one person consistently. Because when I released that video, I then got a written message by somebody in America who basically just said that my story really helped him come out of a very, very, very dark place. And it was a bit of a lengthy one, but it was a beautiful message from him. And that really caught me off guard, because I didn't realize that could be an effect of me posting my video, So when I got that message from him, I was just like, wow, okay, so maybe I was initially doing it for me, but now I can actually do this for others. And that's where the whole shift happened. So then I started to consistently share different pieces of my story, help other people who still had chains holding them back, and help them break through those chains and help them share their story. And then I kind of been on a journey, and then transitioned into helping personal brands to create their story, to help them connect with their audience. And now I've read myself and found myself a place within a personal branding and storytelling coach.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that's such a great thing when you share and then you find out that it's impacting others and making a difference for them.
100%.
Such an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So Perry, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today. And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
The one piece of advice I would give myself whilst going through that tough time is that I don't need to live as a victim of my story going forward, because it wasn't my fault. And everyone has a choice. So I would have made myself realize that going through this tough time, that it won't last. It's going to end very soon. And when it does end, you then have a choice to live as a victim or become the hero of your story. And the advice I would have given to myself is from the get-go to, yes, I would have been very young, right? So I would have been, this 10-year-old would be looking around like, what are you talking about? But if I had that mental space to actually understand what future self was saying, it would be that when I was 11, 12 years old, I wanted to handle that situation then in the most efficient way possible. So I wouldn't live in 14 years worth of secrecy. So to kind of sort of this whole expansion of what I just said, bring it all the way down, is just to say to my young self that, Perry, listen, mate, it's going to end soon. And when it does end, you need to live as a hero of your story and not live as a victim.
Love it. Yeah. And what you said there at the beginning too, that, that it wasn't your fault. And I think, that's just one of the most important things for people to realize, and sometimes it takes a while to realize that, or maybe no one has told them that. And so for anyone listening, I mean, for, who has been blaming themselves, I hope that they can understand too, that whatever they've gone through, it wasn't their fault. Um, and then, use it, become the hero of your story, you know, so we all have the ability to do that. So,
I think it's awareness. Like you said,
yeah, right.
some people, let's say they've gone through something, because at the end of the day, it does depend on who you're hanging around with. If you're hanging around with a particular group of people, maybe you're lonely, you don't hang around with anyone, which is even a worse off situation, because the only person you've got to converse with is yourself. And that's the worst person to converse with when you're going through that.
Yeah.
Then you may not be given those options. Somebody may not have brought you that level of awareness to let you know that you do have a choice. And because some people, like before listening to this episode, some people may not have even heard of the phrase of be the hero of your story rather than a victim. They're like, huh? And now that they've heard it, they're like, huh, okay. Then they can go and time again, because that will be the main factor, and start to actually live as the hero of their story rather than the victim. So again, it comes back to who you're listening to, who you're surrounding yourself with. And I think that is actually one of the main causes as to why people still live in denial or are unable to find forgiveness, because they don't have that awareness that they do actually have a choice at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So Perry, before I let you go, what is the best way for people to connect with you or find out more about what you have going on?
Sure, I'll make this very easy. Perry Power is the most easiest name you can ever remember. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. That's my two main platforms. So there's two Perry Powers that look quite alike, and I still need to have a conversation with this guy. So when you go onto Facebook, yeah, and he actually lives not too far from me, and he's taken perrypower.com, and I'm like, you son of a gun, right? I know, I couldn't believe it, but he's a real estate agent. But you'll be able to see when you go onto my Facebook wall, you'll be able to see it's me, because me and you'll be mutual connections. Just because I've had somebody say that before. So yeah, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I have a podcast show called The Power Show, which I think you said you'll leave a link in the description, right?
I will, yes. For anyone who wants to check out our episode.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
Well, Melissa, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love this.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, Perry. Thank you for, just being open and honest with us today and sharing about your story. And, hopefully we have inspired someone who's listening, and, we've let them know that, hey, what you've gone through is not your fault, and you have the choice, to be that hero of your story, and start thinking about, what that might look like. So thank you for that, Perry.
Yeah, no worries. Hopefully there's one person that listens to this, and what me and you both talked about today, Melissa, is it really helped them to shape their path.
Yeah, I hope so. All right. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 141. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Perry Power to find the links mentioned during this episode, or to leave a comment. So I hope you've been inspired by Perry's story today and are thinking about how you can live as the hero of your story. We didn't have choice when we were being abused, but we have choice now. You deserve to live a life free of your past. My best advice to you is to think about what you'd want that to look like and start taking steps toward making it happen. Each one of us is capable of that. It all starts with one step, no matter how small and no matter where you are in your journey. Whether you're just starting to talk about what happened, or you've been sharing it publicly and you're trying to figure out what's next. So I hope you've been inspired to take one step, the next step, whatever that looks like for you. I encourage you to do it. You are worth it. And come back next month for the next episode. So we are here on December 10th with this episode, and I'm going to be taking a little holiday break. So the next episode is going to be on January 7th. So be sure to come back for that in the new year. And I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season, and I look forward to bringing you the next episode in the new year. And also head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing, as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide, or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And, as always, have hope.